Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple. Manchester City find themselves comfortably top of the Premier League, 10 points clear of the nearest challengers. After a poor start to the campaign, this looked highly unlikely, but Pep Guardiola has once again shown his ability to adapt his team's style of play and find new solutions within his squad. But what tactics exactly have allowed Manchester City to get into this position? Let's take a look. We'll begin by looking at formations. Earlier in the season, City often adopted the 4-2-3-1, with De Bruyne in the 10 position to start off with, and often a false 9, as Jesus and Aguero struggled with injury initially. But in recent weeks and months, they have reverted to the 4-3-3 instead, and there has been extensive squad rotation, but for the sake of the video, these will be the two starting 11s we use. Let's begin by looking at the build-up phase. As always, Manchester City have generally dominated possession, with the highest average possession in the league. And it is extremely rare for them to be pressured in their own third. In fact, City face the most pressures per game by virtue of having so much of the ball, but only face the 13th most pressures per game in their own defensive third, as most teams sit deeper. As a result, City generally come through their own third unchallenged after Ederson finds a centre-back. And here we see the first couple of differences in the two approaches. Earlier in the season, we more frequently saw Cancelo and notably Mendy starting at left back, whilst Kyle Walker was at right back. Both left backs are highly offensive, and Cancelo could tuck into midfield, but we'll focus on what happened when Mendy was in the team. He's much less comfortable on the ball, so entrusting him to invert into these central regions of high pressure would be a risk. In addition, it is not really his natural game, as he is more of a traditional fullback and would hug the touchline and move higher up the pitch. And on the right, we often do see Kyle Walker move into the midfield, although he tends to stay deeper at times to create a 3 in the first line, particularly when City are being pressured by a front 2, as this will give them the numerical advantage. So, earlier in the season, Gundogan would stay deeper, often to be the second pivot alongside Rodri. In the 4-3-3, the makeup of the fullbacks is the first difference lately. Zinchenko has more often been the left back, and we've seen more of Cancelo as the right back, which has altered things. When playing against teams who look to press them with two men, it is Zinchenko who often stays deeper, with Stones moving extremely wide, and João Cancelo moving into the midfield region alongside Rodri. And just as easily, they can build with a 2 when under less pressure, with Zinchenko also joining the midfield, so that they have a 2 and then a 3 in the first phases. This then gives the centre-backs different angles to look to pierce the first line of pressure. And crucially, it means that both of the free 8s are now freed up, unlike the earlier formation where only De Bruyne would be free. Gundogan usually uses this freedom to move higher up between the midfield lines, whilst Bernardo can do the same, but we also see him move wider to provide another option if the centre is too crowded for progression. All of this is facilitated by the fact Zinchenko and Cancelo are extremely comfortable on the ball and more capable of ball progression than, for example, Walker and Mendy. And throughout the season, there has been renewed emphasis on getting men between the lines, and this was even more so when using the 4-2-3-1 early on. In fact, at times, Mahrez tended to move central early to assist this, so Walker would initially stay wide, which would be the trigger for De Bruyne to move deeper. This meant that the shape could look like a 3-4-3, as Rodri would drop into the back line as Walker was higher, whilst Gundogan and De Bruyne stayed deeper. But generally speaking, higher up, Sterling started on the left much more often, and with Mendy as more of a vertical fullback, he would look to get up and down the pitch much more. This meant Sterling would come infield much earlier and would spend more time looking to receive with his back to goal, rather than running at his man. He would at times look to make the run from out to in into this space, looking to receive the chip ball over the back line. But it was advantageous in that now City would have plenty of men rotating between the lines, and Bernardo and De Bruyne in particular used opposing movements well, with Bernardo dropping deep and creating space for De Bruyne to run into as a result. But now, things are slightly different, particularly with the wingers now staying much wider at the start. As Pep himself said, we had to find the way. At the end, I felt that the wingers wide and high helped us to be more stable and have control in many aspects. This was facilitated by the fullbacks primarily. Zinchenko would move more central, giving the left winger more room to start wide. Sterling has still often started there, but we've also seen more of Foden a natural left footer out there, and Sterling instead starting on the right, his natural side as well. And where before Mahrez would cut in between the lines before receiving the ball, now he or Sterling on the right can hug the touchline initially, facilitated by Cancelo. Usually, when Walker pushes into these midfield positions, he's more static, but Cancelo makes runs and dribbles high up into this right half space. As a result, there is less need for the right winger to tuck in early, and they can instead provide the width. We often see this when Mahrez or Bernardo start wide, as they can receive the ball near the touchline, then look for the in-swinging cross from these wider regions. Zinchenko, initially in midfield, as opposed to wide like Mendy, has also unlocked Gundogan, as he finds himself higher in this half space often. From here, he's often able to receive and look to combine with Sterling, who tends to draw defenders towards him, creating more space in the half space for Gundogan to attack. As a result, Gundogan is generally making more runs into the box, helping to explain his increased goal rate since the change. But side overloads and switches are still a big part of the game for City. Down the left, this often occurs when Zinchenko moves wide, joined by Sterling and Gundogan, and often the false nine in Jesus, who has generally operated deeper this season. When the opposition come across, the right winger is then free to receive. Similar mechanisms occur on the right, with Bernardo or De Bruyne moving wide right, joined by the winger and Cancelo. Gundogan crucially moves into this half space, dragging in the fullback, so the switch is on. And when the ball goes wide for the cutback, City commit bodies into the box, and Gundogan's spatial awareness has often seen him arriving late to finish. Now, let's quickly touch on the defensive end of things. City still do look to press high at times, with a midfielder in De Bruyne or Silva pushing up to make it a 4-4-2 temporarily, and this protects the central regions. But they have generally eased off the pressing, opting for a more cautious defensive approach. In the transition, this is facilitated by a strong shield in front of the centre-backs due to their attacking shape, and thus they can look to slow down their opponents. We see this with their fullbacks being their most active defenders, with the most tackles and interceptions per 90. And when they're forced deep for prolonged periods, the shape morphs into a 4-5-1. And the partnership between John Stones and Ruben Diaz has proved to be fruitful, communicating effectively to cover the spaces. Crucially, neither dives into the tackles, staying on their feet to shepherd the opponents wide. Of course, it is almost impossible to fully explore Pep's tactics in any given season, but these are just a few of the key concepts. But how do you see City doing in each competition this season? And what other tactical elements have you noticed? Drop it down in the comments below. A quick shout out to my Patreons for helping to make this video possible. If you want to support, head on over to patreon.com/footballmadesimple and you'll get rewards like early access to videos and exclusive content. And a massive thanks to Benny and Loic for their support on Patreon. But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.